So when you're traveling, if you don't have a map and you don't know where you're going, you're never going to get there. And that's the same with teaching. Without a plan, without knowing where you want to take your students and how you want to get there, it's very difficult to do that. So today, I'm going to walk you through how I would plan a lesson by using the available technology and step by step how we can put together a plan that will make it more likely for you to be effective. I'm Keith Dills, Dean of the College of Education at Slippery Rock University, the Pittsburgh Pedagogue. Today's teacher's tip is how to use lesson planning to make sure that you have a blueprint for moving forward and reaching valuable lessons for your students. So this lesson plan structure deals with point A, which is students' prior knowledge. What is it that they already know? What do they understand? What are their preconceptions? A bell ringer, which is what students do in response to an ambiguity that you might pose, a problem that you might pose. What can you do to stimulate learning by showing students that they don't know quite as much as maybe they thought they did about a topic that's in their world, something that they're concerned with, something that you can build on in terms of their prior knowledge or their experiences, or you provide that experience and help them to get focused on then your objectives. Students will be able to, so you'll form your objectives in terms of what students will be able to do. That way you can turn those into a closure and find out whether you met those objectives. These will align with standards, including career readiness standards. Your input then will be what you'll do to reach your objectives. And this is an outline of the content. So you want to make sure that you have key points, then sub points, and then the questions that you'll ask. What questions will you ask about the concepts or the terms or the ideas that you're going to put forward? Will you have limited discussion? Will you have pictures that represent the ideas? Will you have examples and then non-examples, and certainly definitions? And that's your input. Application is taking what you've taught and what's been put forward and having students use it. Closure. This takes your objectives, turns it into questions, and you find out now, this is sort of your formative assessment. How well did students learn what it is that you had set out for them to learn? And then finally, point B. What is it that students should be able to take away that, again, maybe applies to the career, that applies to their everyday life right now as students? What's the key takeaway? What's the big idea? We don't ever want students to say, so what? Why did we learn these specific objectives that came out of a textbook? How are they applied? So to build a lesson, what you're going to need to do is I would suggest opening your Keynote or PowerPoint presentation, something where you can dump information that you are researching in so that you can rearrange it, organize it, and have the different visuals that you're going to come up with. And so if you go to internet, and let's say you have a textbook that deals with propaganda, and the textbook says propaganda is a concept that students should understand and be able to use. And so what I would do, if you're in Pennsylvania, and even if you're not in Pennsylvania, this is a great website to go to. It's called SAS, Standards Aligned System. And you can see that's the root there, but it's Pennsylvania Department of Education, SAS. And if you go here and just put that in, PDE, Pennsylvania Department of Education, SAS for Standards Aligned System.org, go to the menu that talks about standards, click here to standards, and then you can search the standards. And so you could put in here propaganda. But if you click here, you can see the standards that's aligned. They even provide assessments, materials, resources, really a terrific way to not only make sure you're aligned to the standards, but they will give you specific ideas about what materials and resources to use. So a great way to generate and synthesize, let's say, other experts' ideas about how to approach this. So you could decide that you want students to be able to differentiate between fact and opinion, explain, interpret, describe, and or analyze the use of facts and opinions in texts, so on and so forth. So there's a lot of terrific standards that you can use. And so you'll go back to your PowerPoint presentation or your keynote presentation, and you now know what your objectives are, and you can include those for students to see. And so I would have those objectives available for students to see. But you can see your objectives are not until this part of your lesson. For the students, I would just hit them right away with a bell ringer. Motivate them to learn, get their attention because they've been busy out in the hallway and thinking about other things. Raise ambiguity and pose a problem for students. And so what could you do that's in students' lives now? We want to build on their prior knowledge that deals with propaganda. And this is where you as an artist, as a teacher, will have to be thinking about how this will work and knowing your students, what's their prior knowledge and what do you see as some issues that they might get motivated to learn about that it's related to propaganda. And so you could do a Google search that will see what other teachers have done. You can go into SAS, Standardized System, and see what other folks have done in terms of building on prior knowledge. But what I've come up with is I know that commercials are something that all students have been exposed to. And so the question is, what could we find that deals with your objectives, and it's a bell ringer that deals with commercials which are in students' everyday lives. So back to the internet, I would do a Google search. And so in that Google search, I would put in jingles, let's say. And can we use jingles in a way? What are catchy jingles? And what do you think is here that is in your students' experience? What do they know? Will they know McDonald's? Will they know Kit Kat, Oscar Mayer, maybe State Farm? And so what I would do is in my PowerPoint, I would go and I would ask students to take out a paper and list from 1 to 5. And I'm going to ask them what product. And so students know to list on their notebook, in their notebooks, 1 to 5. And 1, I'm going to ask them, give me a break. Give me a break. What's the product? And 2, I'm going to say, like a good neighbor. And so on and so forth. And you'll do 3, 4, and 5. Now, so you've used an experience here in the classroom where you have 25 students and you've got them in 3 words to come up with Kit Kat. And then you go over it and you see who got them. And it's fun and it's engaging and everybody's going to be successful at this. And so your question then becomes, why? Why is it that with 3 words you can picture, you can tell me what the product is, you can visualize it, you can taste it almost. Why is that the case? And so you can ask students to tell you why they think that is the case. And they might get at, well, it's repetition. We hear this a lot. It's catchy. It's linked to music, so it really becomes embedded, and so on and so forth. And you can say, what you just described to me were aspects of propaganda. And so that's your whole bell ringer, which is to get them now to be interested, what is propaganda? And so in my input, so we're back here, we've got, we've built on prior knowledge, we used our bell ringer, and I'm going to say my objectives are, so I would put my objectives there and have them out for students to see, and then you move right into the input. So we've got our SWBAT, and then you're going to list what the idea that we're going to address propaganda, and you can actually put the standards there, so on and so forth, and then we're going to have our input. And in the input, that's when you're going to list what are the different propaganda techniques, and they're glittering generalities. They are so on and so forth. There are several different propaganda techniques, and then give an example or give a definition. So define it, give an example, a non-example, it's not this, and then show sort of a picture or something along those lines. And you go through each one of these, and then you can ask students to give you another example that they may have, or you might give a non-example, an example, and have the students pick which one is a glittering generality and which one isn't. And you would do that for all of your propaganda techniques that you're using. So that's your input. Now, how do we get to application? How do you get students to apply this? And so I could hit more standards here. I can get into World War II and who were the characters in World War II, and how is propaganda used to influence two different countries to go two different directions. And so you might say, I'm going to have you get into groups of 3, and I would pass out pictures from World War II and talk about who Hitler was, who were the Allies, and who were the Axis powers, what were they fighting over, and how is propaganda being used in one direction dealing with Hitler, and how is propaganda being used in another direction in another country dealing with Hitler, and what are the specific propaganda techniques being used, and then match the propaganda to the picture. And you give students no more than the time they need to complete this. And so what we've got here is 5 to 10 minutes for a bell ringer, less than a minute to show objectives. We've got probably 15 minutes on input. And now your application, if it takes 5 minutes, then give them 5 minutes and then put them on the clock and have students then report back to the class which propaganda techniques goes with which picture. And then you could expand this even to get into if you wanted to be in advertisements or in marketing, how could you use propaganda for positive influence? And then finally, your B, what's your key takeaway? So what's the so what? Well, just as students were influenced in the bell ringer by commercials to know what the jingles were and the exact products, you want to be aware of when you're being influenced. Is someone using a technique to try to influence or convince you of one way or another? Are you mindful of that? And can you prepare yourself and ask good questions and make sure you understand the difference between the facts of the matter and the opinion? So this is Keith Dills. I'm the Pittsburgh Pedagogue, the Dean of College of Education at Slippery Rock University, and I wish you best of luck as you put together your lesson plans.